President and CEO of BIO, as I have been for my 16th year. And we're going to talk about the coming election and its impact on policy, what's going on in Washington. For those of you who don't know, one of the reasons that I'm able to talk about this a little bit more than the average person is because I spent 12 years in Congress. Before that, I was in the state legislature of Pennsylvania for a dozen years. I left Congress undefeated and unindicted to come to, which is getting more and more difficult to do. But I escaped unscathed to come to BIO. So where are we? The way I talk about where we are right now in history is that it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. The science is galloping. You can always say that the science is better than ever because that is the nature of science. It builds upon itself. But we really and truly are at inflection points now, I think, because of what we can do now in gene therapy and cell therapy and gene editing and immunotherapy. And so the promise for patients and for the industry has absolutely never been better from a scientific point of view. Having said that, as we all know, we are at the worst of all times politically. I think it is fair to say that never before has this industry faced stiff political headwinds, such mountains of political ignorance about what we do, and that's frustrating because I spend a lot of my time, and our entire BIO staff spends a lot of time trying to educate our policymakers, but sometimes the temptation to be political and make statements for re-election purposes is stronger than adhering to the truth. Where we are right now, of course, is that because of all of this opposition, we'll get into the details a little bit, but fundamentally, we're in a situation where the House passed a bill. It's for the most part a very anti-innovation bill. It's DOA in the Senate. The Senate passed a bill that's more bipartisan, the Grassley-Wyden bill. It is much better than H.R. 3 is from the House. The President has a whole set of proposals, all of which provides a moment that is both quite threatening politically between now and the election in terms of what might happen. It is also somewhat potentially an opportunity to actually get some kind of a deal that could bring the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats and the President together to put some of this political ire behind us. I think that's a long shot. I think that's what we're going to talk about. With that, I shall turn it over to our esteemed moderator.
Thank you, Jim, very much. I think that sets the stage perfectly well for our discussion. I want to add my welcome to everybody. I'm Ryan Ryan, the Senior Healthcare Policy Analyst for Bloomberg, the company, not the candidate. That clear. That just saw a poll that came out that makes me want to say that a little bit more right now. So Jim's given his introduction. I also want to ask the other members of our panel to maybe introduce themselves, and after you do, perhaps just ask, from your point of view, what is the one key issue that you wish policymakers were focusing on here in 2020?
So Sarah Donovan from Avalere Health. Avalere is a healthcare research and advisory services firm located in Washington, D.C., and we work with all sectors of the healthcare system. So being in D.C., obviously we're hearing a lot of the rumble coming out of the White House and Congress on a daily basis. I would say the one issue that I wish that policymakers were focused on was more conversations around sustainability. So how do we ensure that the U.S. market continues to reward innovation while making healthcare affordable, while ensuring access? I think some people argue you can't have all three of those at once, but I think that if everyone came together and spent less time arguing, we could likely find a way.
Like having kids. Good afternoon. My name is Peter Pitts. I'm the president of a think tank called the Center for Medicine in Public Interest. I'm a former FDA Associate Commissioner. I think you're going to hear a lot about the key kind of denominator being protecting sustainable innovation, and I'll certainly weigh in on that. Unless people understand that in the healthcare debate, if you somehow negotiate away the value of innovation, everything else is for naught. Pricing is temporal. Pricing is an ecosystem, and that the view of punishing developers who largely fail and burn through billions of dollars trying to reach innovation, if you don't incentivize that appropriately, it will just go away, as it went away in Germany, as it's going away almost entirely in Europe, and it doesn't really exist anyplace else. So I think that the key thing to discuss relative to these proposals, once you get beyond the politics, if we can even do that, is, you know, how do they impact the impetus to move forward on biopharmaceutical innovation?
Hi everybody, I'm Sue Peshin with the Alliance for Aging Research. We're a national nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to promote research as a way to enhance aging and health. And we've been doing that for more than 30 years in both public policy and health education. I agree with Peter. I think to a certain degree you were saying total costs of care need to be accounted for rather than just looking at the issue of drugs and drug pricing. There's sort of issues across the board with hospital costs, outpatient costs, all of that, and we need to look at all of those issues. Another area that I think is key that was brought up through the administration was kind of looking at ways to speed up transition from FDA approval to coverage and reimbursement.
Hi everybody, I'm Paul Hastings, and I'm the president and CEO of Nkarta Therapeutics. We're a very young cell therapy company discovering and developing NK cell therapeutics for patients with cancer. I'm also the vice chair, of the Biotech Innovation Organization with Jim, and I'm on the diversity committee and chair the patient advocacy committee. I'm also the president and CEO of a patient advocacy organization. It's called Youth Rally, and it's a summer camp for kids with all forms of bowel and bladder disorders. I would like Congress to focus on patients.
I think that's a good answer. All right, there. So let's get down to business. You know, Congress to me has often resembled a college freshman in that they only act when there's a deadline forcing them to do so. And as luck would have it, there actually is a date that everyone should probably circle on your calendar, and that's May 27th. That's when a number of health extenders, the funding runs out for those. Congress set this up in their year-end budget bill back in December, with one goal being to try and force some action on two issues, one being surprise billing, the other being drug pricing. So there's some activity on both those fronts right now. Jim very eloquently laid out the fact that H.R. 3 is, in my estimation as well, DOA in the Senate. However, embedded within that and the Senate Finance Committee's bill that President Trump referenced specifically in Chairman Grassley's State of the Union address are some things that everybody kind of agrees on. Everybody seems to want an out-of-pocket cap for seniors in the Medicare Part D program. Everybody wants to see, so they say, Medicare, the taxpayers' exposure in the catastrophic phase go from 80% now down to 20%. The details obviously matter in between there, but even this morning, the administration released their annual budget proposal, also calling for this out-of-pocket cap. So I guess I'll direct this first to Jim and then to Sue and anyone else who wants to pop in, is what should Congress do this year, and maybe what do you think can happen in an election year?
Okay, so maybe it's helpful a little bit to talk about why it is that we're in such a mess politically. If you took all of the Democratic presidential and President Trump and asked them the question, what's been going on with drug prices? They would all use the term skyrocketing drug prices. In fact, last year, the net pricing of drugs, brand drugs, was down 3%, something like that. And that's really been the trend. There are some high launch prices, and there are some outliers and so forth, and there's a lot of increases every 6 months. But the fact of the thing is that has skyrocketed is the percentage of people with high deductible plans. So if you get your insurance from your employer, 50% of you are in a high deductible plan. And of course, the way Medicare Part D is set up, it's essentially a high deductible plan. So what people are angry about is not the price of drugs. They're angry about, obviously, what they pay. And they conflate them, the politicians conflate them, and the media conflates them, but that's the problem. When this issue got so red hot politically, the Bio Board and the Pharma Board and all our companies would come to our meetings and say, you're not telling the story well enough, communicate more, talk about, tell our story, we're right, we'll win, take it to the Supreme Court. So we did that. Bio did it, Pharma did it, we ran all kinds of ads online, earned media, talked to the reporters, talked to the editorial boards, new websites, you name any form of communication, and we did it. We told all the things that are true. Drug prices are not skyrocketing. 90% of projects fail. We make more drugs than the rest of the world combined. We're only 14% of the spend. Why don't you go after where the money is? That's in the hospitals. And we did that in spades. The fact of the matter is that you walk into a drugstore to get your kids medicine and they want $800 and you don't have $800, you don't care about any of that. And you're angry probably at the drug company because it's a bunch of drugs you got in your hand or you can't get in your hand because of that out of pocket. So a couple of years ago, I said to the board, we have a problem. We can't talk our way out of this. We have to change the facts on the ground, and the primary fact on the ground that needs to be changed is patient out-of-pocket cost. And let's start with Part D, because that's a lot easier to fix than enforce the commercial market, and the employers to lower their deductibles that they offer their employees. So we went to Grassley, it's in this Senate bill. We went over to see Pelosi, it's in the House bill. We've been many, many times to the White House, and so the one thing in common between the House and the Senate and the President of the United States is an out-of-pocket cap of somewhere between $2,000 and $3,100 a year for seniors. 45 million Americans on Medicare Part D. 1 million of them are paying more than $3,000 a year out of pocket, and many are paying 5, 7, 10, 9, 12, and on up. So it's immoral. There are two, and I'll stop here, but there are two moral principles that should underscore everything we do. Principle number one is no one should ever do without the medicine that he or she needs because they cannot afford what's required to come from their pocket. Anything else is immoral. So we have to fix that, and it's fixable. The second principle is no policy should ever be acceptable to an elected official or to anyone else if it drives money away from this incredible medical innovation that's going on in the biotechnology sector. If you follow those two principles, and you can, they're not mutually exclusive, we can take care of patients, we can take care of payers, we can take care of costs, and we can continue to have innovation.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate your advocacy. You've just been so steady for several years now, talking about out-of-pocket costs and also sort of bringing attention to what are folks paying right at the pharmacy counter. Because there was a lot of over-focus on retail, the pricing by the drug company, which is not what people pay at the pharmacy counter, and that's what they care about. And the Alliance for Aging Research did some polling through morning consults. And the fact of the matter is people are worried about those prices. And in fact, we found 1 in 4 seniors at some point stops or slows down or sort of cuts their pills in half because of these issues. And a lot of it has to do with fixed incomes. About 1 in 2 seniors have an annual per capita of about $26,200 a year, which is really low. So if you get into a high-cost drug, it's basically wipes you out. So I agree with you with what you talked about with an out-of-pocket cap. I think the other thing that we're in agreement on, and a lot of the patient advocacy groups have been working on, has to do with this issue of high deductible plans, which you can even have in Medicare Part D plans, and that has to do with smoothing. Because you have to meet these deductibles at the beginning of the year. So in January and February, you hit a wall, and it happens every year. And if you're not able to spread those costs out throughout the year, you're in a pickle, and it can drain you. So there are proposals also on both the House and the Senate side, but the Senate is where we're hoping things go to allow for folks to be able to smooth out those costs. In terms of your question, Brian, I think it just depends on whether or not the IPI proposal, and I know that's the next question you have going on, goes anywhere, and the administration can sort of check the box and say, oh, we did something on drug pricing, and also how much they decide to come out in support of the Grassley-Wyden proposal. Was mentioned in the State of the Union. We were excited to hear that. We were super excited to hear that the International Pricing Index was not mentioned. And so I just think it depends on, all of those different pieces.
A word on smoothing. So there's a difference between surprise billing and smoothing. Smoothing means you go to the pharmacy counter almost for your first fill, and you're shocked that your initial pay is so high. Lots of issues there. The big issue is people walk away from the pharmacy. They never even get their first fill. And then the numbers behind that relative to non-compliance are astronomical. So how do you smooth it out? How do you spread it over the course of 12 months? Because most of the first fills happen in January. how do you smooth that out over the course of the year, so you get people on treatment that the doctor has already prescribed, get them better, and move on from there? Very, very important distinction.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I just went through this myself last week. I called my medical supply provider and said, where is my first month of my medical devices? And they said, oh, you didn't return our phone call. You have a $700 deductible, and we're supposed to talk to you and get your credit card information, even though it's on file, before we can ship you the materials, and we left you a message, you never called us back. $700 for my first month. And so I can only imagine some of the kids that I work with, what their parents are gonna think when they get their first phone call from that medical supply company that says, oh, by the way, your first month is 700 or 800 or 3,000. By the way, the total bill for those supplies for a month's supply was bigger than $700, right? So that's what patients face when they go to the medical device supplier, the pharmacy, and I think when you bring it back to the patient and what the patient has to endure, this is just unacceptable.
And by the way, we're using a copay accumulator now, which ought to go to cover your annual cost.
Yeah, I think, what we're really saying is a lot of it is the benefit design. I think the industry can be a really challenged position here. One example is when some of the manufacturers of the PCSK9 inhibitors drastically lowered their prices. I think they were something like, $14,500 a year, and it was reduced by like 60%. But what we actually showed, we modeled this out, and on average, the average Part D beneficiary is actually paying more out of pocket after the price was reduced because of where the drug showed up on the benefit. So for me, that was a really, really interesting example that we can share to start to help beneficiaries really understand that it's more about the benefit and not always about the list price of the drug, to Sue's point. And even when manufacturers are waving their hands saying, look, we've developed this like really innovative drug, we are over here trying to lower prices as best we can, but we don't have control over the benefit design. So it's just another example of how we need better solutions in Part D, and we need to ensure that patients are literate enough to understand what they're actually signing up for.
And copay beyond Part D programs is based on the list price versus on the PBM negotiated price, so some shenanigans going on there as well.
It's a whole other issue.
So thank you. And so Sarah, I'll stick with you and then maybe go to Jim as we transition from Part D to Part B. One thing Sue mentioned that was notable in this absence from the State of the Union address was any mention of the IPI, the International Pricing Index for Part B. I know that had been a concern for several folks heading into it. I don't think there was a mention in the President's budget that was released today. So I guess that's still sitting at the White House. So maybe Sarah and Jim, is that something that you still think can happen? And if not, what policy levers should Congress pull in the Part B program?
So in terms of are we going to see an IPI, a few of us were actually joking right before the panel. I'm going to pull the who the heck knows. I think one of the things that we've learned about this administration is that they can be highly unpredictable. That being said, I think the fact that there was no direct mention by the President and the State of the Union about the IPI is probably a positive sign for our industry on this exact proposal. I would say I haven't had a week in 2020 thus far where we didn't hear from some high-ranking official that it was very likely to come out. We were expecting something, I think, 2 weeks ago. We were hearing, by the end of the week, we're definitely going to see IPI, get ready. We were doing, some modeling and preparations as such. That being said, about like what do we actually want to do in Part B? I think that the administration has been very clear about their goals, right? They want to lower drug prices. They want to lower patient out-of-pocket costs, and they want to change physician payment models and incentives in the marketplace. So I think it is likely that we will see something that moves away from ASP +6 and the buy and bill model, and that can take a lot of different forms. We've seen inflation-based rebates in Part B as a proposal. There's not necessarily bipartisan support for that. There's not alignment on House, Senate, and administration on that. There's certainly not industry alignment on that. We've also seen, flat fee for administration. We've seen models where they think who takes title to the drug. If that changed, that would adjust incentives. So I really think ultimately Congress will have to decide which of these things, out-of-pocket costs, changing physician incentives, they really want to target as they make changes to Part B, because it's hard to accomplish all of those things in one model. Also on IPI, I think there hasn't been enough talk about what this will actually do to the global market. Industry is not stupid. They are really going to think about what markets they choose to launch in. And ultimately, that could have a really negative impact on patient access, not just in the US, but across the globe. They'll start to think about and make strategic decisions about what markets they choose to go in if we do choose to do an international pricing reference. And then we'll have another issue of what's gonna happen, from a trade perspective, what will that mean for those countries that are indicated in the IPI?
So where does this come from? It comes from the fact that, as we all know, Americans pay significantly more for drugs than our neighbors in Canada and Europe and much of the rest of the world. Why is that? It's because we're the only place in the world that has anything close to a market-based system for launching our drug, with the prices with which we launch our drugs. The result of that is, as I mentioned earlier, we produce 57% of all the drugs in the world, and many of the drugs, the rest of the world, more than the rest of the world combined, and many of the drugs innovated in Europe and Asia and are innovated for our market. Of course, our companies would rather get higher prices in those other markets, but they have single-payer systems and they have only so much money, and they set the prices essentially. Our companies will take that because it's rational to take even a small margin at that point in the process when mostly what they have is manufacturing costs. But the margins in those markets would never be enough to drive innovation. And so what the president fails to understand is, whereas Trump's #1 theme is we're getting ripped off by the rest of the world in a whole variety of ways, instead of saying, coming to the industry and say, how can we help you get better pricing overseas, he's decided to go the other way. He rails against socialized medicine, and yet he's prepared to import socialized medicine prices into our country. So, and in H.R. 3, one of the reasons I said that bill was so terrible is because it has international price indexing. When we created the Medicare Part D program, we had administered by the private insurers, and they were to negotiate the prices, and they do that very well, which is why prices outside of Medicare are not much different from prices inside of Medicare. The Democrats have always, since the beginning, since the Republicans passed this thing, said, it's bad that we can't negotiate prices. Every time they've had the Congressional Budget Office look at giving the Secretary the power to negotiate prices, the answer has been there's no savings unless you restrict the formularies. Nobody wants to do that. So what they finally did in this bill is they said, well, we'll use international price indexing like Trump. We'll pick a different set of countries, and then we'll take all of that savings that comes from that, and we'll use it to create dental, vision, and hearing benefits for seniors in Medicare, because of course it's perfectly logical that all of those benefits should be paid for by drug manufacturers in America. But so what we're terribly afraid of is that the Pelosi IPI and the Trump IPI somehow gets married in this process, which is why it's fairly dangerous. It hasn't happened yet. I think that the people who understand the industry in the administration know that it's a terrible idea. And I think they are trying to basically use it as a cudgel to get the industry to come to the table to support something like Grassley-Wyden. We are hearing that at one point it looked like it was going to apply to Part D as well as Part B. Now we're hearing it's probably scaled down to Part B, and it may really just be focused on the most egregious in cases of pricing. So this would give the administration, the president of the administration, ability to say, I got prices down to the way they are in the rest of the world, which would be enough for his base, and then hopefully the details won't be as terrible.
I think it's important to say that IPI, as it currently is being discussed, is a bad idea. As is its idiot cousin, drug importation. But when you look at the IPA concept, there are things in there that are worthwhile to discuss. For example, should some products currently in Part B be moved into a Part D or Part D type model? Those are intelligent kind of things to think about in terms of reallocating resources where they are actually needed. And I think that we on this panel will continue to fight IPI as kind of the broad price control system. I think to give everybody a victory, to give the president a victory, there are concepts in there that actually are thoughtful and can and probably should be accommodated.
I was just going to ask you like what?
Like moving some drugs that are currently in Part B into Part D.
So we'll stick with maybe Peter and Paul. We don't have a Mary, but we'll open this up to anyone else as well, and maybe talk about biosimilars for just a second as we talk about affordability. Because there's an activity there in DC as well. Last week, the FDA and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, put out a pretty lengthy, for them, joint statement talking about some things they perceive they can do in that area. They're also going to have a public meeting next month on March the 9th. So you're young, so I'll let you comment on this first about what policy levers actually make sense on the biosimilar side of things.
Anybody here from Pfizer? So Pfizer filed a citizens petition a year and change ago, saying that the FDA needs to start cracking down on, what's the right word to use, misleading communications about the values of biosimilars. And obviously, the uptake of biosimilars in this country has not been as rapid as some people fantasized they would be prior to legislation allowing them to actually exist in the U.S. But the reality is that it's very hard to say that, when you say biosimilar does not mean identical. That labeling extrapolation is an important issue. These are facts, and you may not like it if you're selling biosimilars, but these are legitimate things to discuss, because if you don't discuss them, A, you're not being honest, and two, you're not giving physicians the ability to think about how they actually work with de novo patients or patients who are currently on therapy. The FDA, FTC joint communication speaks to that, but where they will really get traction, if it happens, and it should, is from an FTC perspective on things like exclusionary contracting. The real reason that biosimilars aren't being used in a greater volume in this country is because we don't have enough of them. The FDA is being very speedy in moving these programs through the agency, and companies are being very smart at how to design them. They're not being, the products aren't gaining a volume majority because of the way contracting works in this country, and that's an FTC issue, and that is absolutely what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention. So, these are the folks that are controlling what's going on at the countertop, and here's CVS at the very front. And I don't know if you all heard about CVS in the last couple of weeks announcing a program for zero copay for patients on insulin. It's just unfortunate that patients had to die before companies started paying attention to that. What I did want to mention about insulin is here's a marketplace that as the price of insulin has increased by hundreds of percent over the number of years, the net price the manufacturers actually collect has gone down. So that means the money's going somewhere. Where's it going? Okay, we always get accused of, attacking the PBMs, but it's hard not to in this particular case. So I think that's a real issue. The other thing I find offensive is that Eli Lilly, who is the manufacturer of Humulin, also has biosimilar insulin out there on the market that hasn't been adopted by PBMs. Why? Because what you just said about the economics of contracting. And in this particular case, it's about a rebate. A lower priced biosimilar is not going to create the kind of rebate for the people who are supposed to control drug prices to get than a branded drug. This is a perverse situation that needs to be fixed quickly.
I think from a legislative perspective, how do you legislate against these kind of these perverse incentives? And certainly you legislate them or rule them within Medicare and Medicaid. And I think you almost have to shame companies into doing the right thing.
I agree.
And so sticking maybe on insulin for a second, and I'll direct this to Sue, and then Jim, there is an activity there as well. I think next month, the FDA declassifies insulin as a biologic, which should open up the door, maybe some competition down the road that hasn't been open before. And then Jim, I think the Republican alternative, HR 19, and the Senate companion as well, they've inserted, I think, a monthly cap for insulin as well, $50, I believe, as well. So maybe we can start with Sue. Where do you see this going?
Sure, and just to go back to the FDA for a second, they actually just put out a list, I think in the last week, of the guidances that they're going to be updating, and the CVOT guidance, which is just the cardiovascular outcomes trials related to diabetes, was a part of that list. It's been a little over 10 years since they updated that. And that does have a sort of a role to play in terms of what ends up being the cost of innovation around diabetes, because those additional trials are incredibly expensive. So it'd be interesting to see where the FDA goes on the CBOT guidance. I think there are a couple of other things aside from the one option that I know Jim's going to be talking about. Even in the Grassley proposal, which eliminates the coverage gap. It also requires Part D plans to make patient costs available to physicians via electronic medical records, so I think that'll have an impact. And then also the smoothing and the out-of-pocket cap in Part D, I think can all play a role.
I don't have a lot that well covered, but I think the frustrating point is that the members of Congress and many of the media see the blue line, and that's all they want to talk about. And we go and we show them the red line and show them that the industry cannot price its way out of the patient's dilemma, and somehow that gets forgotten because it's not fashionable for politicians to make an argument of any kind that's in defense of the industry. But I think we've made a lot of progress in beginning to educate legislators about PBMs, but we still have a lot of work to do before we get them to take them in part of the team.
So, the Trump administration withdrew the rebate rule last year. One of the reasons the CBO didn't like it very much, I think, said based on their estimates that it would cost the taxpayers $180 billion over 10 years. And there's some questions. HHS in their proposal had some other estimates that said it could maybe save taxpayers $100 billion over 10 years. Without inserting something into the Grassley-Wyden bill and killing the CBO savings, to the extent they want to pay for something, these health extenders as part of this package, how do you get them to address that?
Well, I'm not sure. What happened is, as I recall, was when it looked like the administration was going to do the rebate reform, it showed that there would be an increase in Medicare payments to the beneficiary, small but minimal. And so they lost their nerve, and they decided that they didn't want to give the Democrats the opportunity to say that Trump raised Medicare costs right before the election. That's really what killed it. It was good policy, it's overdue policy, and that's what killed it. So whether that's something we can come back to after the elections, is I think we should.
Well, there's a very key point there, which is the safe harbor, which we're talking about here, in the blueprint, so status, I'm very excited about it. There's a lot of statistics like that show you that what they consider as essential, right? One way I think you can bridge not letting that vanish forever is transparency. And Secretary Azar has been very aggressive about making numbers transparent to the public. I think when you make numbers of PBM issues transparent to the public, even those for government purchase products, people's jaws will absolutely drop to the floor. The numbers are like $66 billion per year sunk into the PBM vortex, providing no healthcare benefits for anybody. That's shocking. And I think that once people begin to cogitate on that, we'll see action. Once they get tired of beating up on Jim and the folks at Pharma on why are drugs so expensive, and listen to, well, let's show you where the money goes, let's fix that. Maybe that gives a renaissance to this whole safe harbor concept.
Sure, I was just going to add, I completely agree with what both of you said so far. In terms of the sharing rebates at point of sale, I don't think it's totally dead. I think it was a bad political moment. And when you do talk about raising premiums in the Medicare plans, most folks, again, in our polling show overwhelmingly they're very satisfied with their Medicare plans. So the idea of the insurance companies and the PBMs saying bigger premiums are coming your way, it's all going to fall on you. It was a moment for them and they won that moment, but I do think that all the education, people didn't understand what PBMs were before all of this, And we've been continuing to push it from the patient advocacy community. I think we have a lot more work to do. But the one thing I will say is, if we can't accomplish something by this spring in out-of-pocket and smoothing and whatever, ends up going through, if it's Grassley, if it's some other package, we're not gonna have much luck doing more. And I do think that there needs to be more done in total cost of care in general. But to push this PBM issue, rebates at point of sale, we have to get something done this spring.
Transparency. I, as an individual, believe in caps on price increases. When you talk to other CEOs, their comment about inflation caps on price increases is that increase is going mostly to the PBM. So I also believe that if one is going to have a price increase that goes beyond a reasonable amount, say 5 or less %, that one explains where it's going. And I think if one is transparent about that, it speaks to what you just said about people understanding where those dollars are going, so that the responsibility for that price increase is set in the hands of those who are actually taking it, not those that are looking like they're taking it.
During the Senate hearing on this topic, when I think it was Senator Wyden said, well, how many of you would lower your prices if the PBM discounts went away? Every hand went up. So
on price increases and inflation caps, there are three things that make people upset about drug prices. What's the launch price? How often do they increase the prices, and how much do they pay out of pocket? We talked about fixing the out of pocket, which, as has sort of been mentioned, will actually save the healthcare system money because out of pocket makes sense if I twist my ankle and I need an x-ray and I'm trying to decide whether I call an ambulance to take me to the ER. I'm highly deductible, I don't do that, or I ask my neighbor to take me to the emergency care center. Makes perfect sense. It never made a dime of sense when it came to prescription drugs, because all out of pocket does is drive down adherence, which drives up hospitalization, healthcare costs, so it never made any sense. So we should fix the out of pocket costs. And the launch price is the only thing that enables us to be, because we can set that based on the market, it's the thing we have to preserve most. Let the market drive the launch price. So the problem with Medicare Part D is that the Congress has put in there a discount, started out as 50% discount in the so-called donut hole, and then a couple years ago they jacked it up to get some more money to 70%. That cost us about $85 billion over 10 years, okay? And here's the thing about it. Nobody gets any credit for it. The Congress extracts all that money from the industry, and not a single Medicare beneficiary knows about it or thanks them, right? We cough up all that money, and we get no credit for it, right? So the thing about inflation caps is that would be about another $85 billion over 10 years. Now, if somebody wanted to sit down and say, look, we already have price controls of some kind in the Medicare Part D program, it's called big discounts. Let's restructure things, okay? Let's get rid of those big discounts, and then let's figure out if we're going to have some kind of an inflation cap at that kind of a price control as opposed to a discount price control. Everybody gets credit for it, and then you just dial the discount down to whatever number it is so that you basically keep the system whole, and then I've always said, and then we'll cough up enough to cover the out-of-pocket costs. And that would be like a triple victory, which is why you probably won't have it.
You took a lot of heat for saying that you're putting information on the cost of it.
Mostly for my own board.
So Sarah, so underpinning some of these comments is the fact that I think it was famously said a few years ago that we have a blockbuster health insurance model for a Netflix drug discovery world. And so as we take maybe a broader view of things, what sorts of alternative payment or alternative financing models would make sense for policymakers?
Yeah, great question. I think, when we look at some of the more, the areas where we're seeing a lot of innovation in drug development, we can easily look at drugs that are durable or curative. So, cell and gene therapy, I think right now there's over 800 active INDs at FDA for cell and gene therapies. We're expecting like 10 launches per year through the next decade. This is going to be a massive market, and in my opinion, it's really either going to force some sort of change in terms of how we pay for high-value drugs, or it's going to start hindering access. So we've got some choices to make. Right now, we're in a healthcare system where we're seeing one-off solutions, so for one specific drug and one specific payer. So you mentioned Netflix. That's not the one it was. The Netflix payment model that we saw Gilead negotiate with Louisiana State Medicaid, there was also one in Washington. But the thing is, like, secret, it's not actually Netflix. I think of Netflix as I pay my $9.99 a month and I can have as much as I want. It's actually not that. It's more or less an expense cap, which is also likely not sustainable. But on the plus side, we've seen a lot more access to hepatitis C cures in the state of Louisiana. Whether they will re-up that, that's something we can look at. But we've not really seen that that's going to be a sustainable long-term thing. Other things that we've seen are some innovation in pay over time models. So, for example, Avexis, for their gene therapy, Zolgensma, negotiated a deal with Credo, where it's essentially a PMPM, pay over time, for 5 years to create more sustainability in that system. So you're paying over the course of 5 years on a PMPM basis, giving access to all patients that would be eligible for Zolgensma. We've also seen some innovation in outcomes-based contracts as a way to experiment in paying for these high-value drugs. So, we think of outcomes-based contracts as typically being the duration of a health plan's year for 12 months, but we've actually seen for Luxturna, Spark Therapeutics, gene therapy, they've actually negotiated some longer-term outcomes-based contracts. So, for example, they have a deal with Harvard Pilgrim where it's a 30-month contract. They measure short and long-term outcomes and pay based on performance against those outcomes. So that's kind of what's been done. I think there's also been some experimentation with reinsurance. I think there's probably more to come on reinsurance. Cigna has done kind of a 5-year reinsurance model looking at cell and gene therapy, and we've seen some other research happening in these spaces. So reinsurance is one area where I think we're going to see more exploration in the commercial market for these types of high-value curative therapies. I also have heard a lot of buzz around what could multi-year insurance look like. So, an insurance company that's going to make an investment in a curative therapy that is scared that if they make, a $2.5 million investment in a patient to cure them for hemophilia A, are they actually going to realize the longer term benefit of that if they only have them for 12 months? If the patient had the option of buying a 3 or 5 year insurance plan, that might change the way that we're thinking about those types of investments. Another one is health insurance portability, where say that a patient, invests in Peter, says, I'm going to pay $2.5 million for your treatment, and then Peter the next year says, thanks, health insurance company A, I'm now going to move to health insurance company B. And what could happen in health insurance portability model is that health insurance company B could pay health insurance company A for the value that they are realizing on Peter having gotten that treatment. It's complex. It likely involves a third-party administrator, more or less, to help oversee the dollar flow or provide some additional reinsurance. But it certainly is possible in some of the things that we're talking about. And there's also things like direct mortgages. A lot of, as we're talking about affordability, a lot of people don't like to talk about that in the terms of healthcare. But, we also mortgage our student loan debt, we mortgage our, home loans. So having the option to do that is not off the table, in my opinion. So one thing I like to do when we talk about these level, of prices and cures is, let's say that everyone in the audience here has a 2-year-old child that has a genetic form of blindness, and you can pay $900,000 to cure them of that treatment. How many of you are going to find a way to cure them of blindness and cough up the $900,000? Yeah, right. So it just puts things in a different perspective when we're talking about cures that are mainly for the pediatric population and can completely change the outlook of that individual.
It also speaks to where we were 10 years ago versus where we are now. It's not Netflix or mortgages, all those things, it's taxes. In a value-based reimbursement system, we're living in a Star Wars universe with a Flintstones reimbursement system. It's going to be bifurcated and trifurcated, it's got 1,000 ways to Sunday, and it's going to be complicated, it's going to be hard, and it's going to be more fair for some people than for others. You simply can't cast a net and say we're doing it the same way for everybody like we once did. Those days are gone forever.
I totally agree, Peter. And one thing I will say is there are groups like the Innovation Value Initiative, IVI, that are looking at disease-specific models of value and also incorporating patient preference. Because what's important to me in terms of an outcome might not be important to you. And so it is
What's important to you is important to me.
it's important to get much more of an idea across patient populations than I think the current models allow. But what concerns us quite a bit and should be concerning all of you is the Institute for Clinical Economic Review, or ICER. They're currently reviewing the newer innovative drugs for sickle cell. They're basically looking at the innovators that are coming off the market and making decisions about whether or not the prices that have been set for the list price are worth it for the patients involved. And you mentioned kids and changing their trajectory. Age is a huge discriminatory factor. Disability is as well with the ICER quality model. When you're looking at quality adjusted life years, basically you get dinged for age or disability. Kids would get dinged as well if they were sick. And they determine whether something is worth it or not. Quality of life, like medications that improve your quality of life in mental health, in neuropsychiatric symptoms for Alzheimer's disease, they're not really factored into those models, so those things are not worth it. And a lot of big pharmas belong to ICER. They feel like, be close keep your friends close, your enemies closer. We would advocate for big pharma to drop membership in ICER, and anybody who is thinking about joining, that's where they're looking for their revenue over the next several years, because the Laura and John Arnold Foundation are going to be backing down, so they are looking for new ways to get revenue. Don't join ICER, join us in the battle. We have an ICERFacts.org campaign. That's not where we want to go with these models.
Thank you, Sue. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we do have a microphone. I'm sure there's some questions for our Hall of Fame panel. As you all think about those questions, you maybe get to the podium. I'll ask one last one myself, and that is, assuming Iowa can finish counting the votes, we will have an election this fall. I'm not going to put you on the spot and tell you and ask you who's going to win. I will ask you, starting with Jim and coming down, what should your stakeholders be thinking about as they survey the various outcomes? I mean, we're going to have Bernie and the Democratic Congress nuking the filibuster to get government negotiated prices, or what else is on the table?
So sometimes I'm pretty good at predicting election outcomes. In March of 2016, I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce and I said, Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. The next words that came out of my mouth were, and I say that in horror, what I think is interesting about this year is you could have a brokered convention. It could very well be that by the time the Democrats get to convention, let's assume Bernie Sanders continues to lead. There will be something like 3,980 delegates there that will be split up between the remaining candidates, and he very well may not have enough to win in the first ballot. At which point you go to the second ballot, and then 700 and some super delegates jump in who are more oriented towards the established Democratic side, office holders and past office holders and so forth. And then the candidates who are no longer viable, their delegates can start going to someone else. So let's say it's Biden. You could get Klobuchar and Buttigieg and others to, did I say that? Whatever her name is, Klobuchar. I don't know what it is. Anyway, to go with Biden, and Biden could actually come out as the nominee. I think he has the better chance of winning over Sanders. Having said that, I think that there's more than a 50% chance that the Democrats will win the White House this year because if you look at the turnout difference in 2018, it was very significant, and that's probably going to be the clue to this. It's going to be more of a turnout than it is changing swing voters. The House will probably stay Democrat. The Senate could go Democrat. You've got McSally in Arizona, and Gardner in Colorado, and Ernst in Iowa, Underwater. The Democrats have to win the net of win 4 seats, but they may lose Alabama. If they do lose, if the Democrats do take over the Senate, and you have a Democrat in the House, and Democrats control the House and in the White House, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Maybe not on a lot of issues, but on our issues, it's going to be a world of hurt which in my opinion is all the more reason why we need to make a deal this year.
Paul?
So it's hard to, beat for that. This is on now? Yeah, so I'm an openly gay, liberal democratic CEO from San Francisco, and I'm here to say the far left sucks and the far right sucks. And I think moderation is what we need, and whoever is moderate is who we need to elect. And that's what we need to get back into politics. The days of Jim Greenwood being a moderate Republican in Congress are gone. Those days need to come back.
Okay, so I work for a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization.
Is there such a thing?
So our goal is really to work with whoever is in power and point out to them what the facts are, what the research shows, and also what, from our experience, older adult patients and their family caregivers would like to see. People have real problems in their real lives, and the kind of bickering and just one party over the other trying to one-up, in our view, is not what it's about. It's really about trying to figure out what are real solutions for people that are gonna help them at the pharmacy counter, that are gonna help them in their communities, that are gonna help them in the doctor's office from a healthcare perspective. That's what we care about.
I don't see how you don't have a broker convention, and I also don't see how you don't have a Democratic nominee and a progressive nominee and the president in a three-way contest, which is a whole other conversation over cocktails. But I think that, if I were running for president, my soundbite on healthcare would be, I'm gonna get elected, and I'm gonna slash your copays. You walk into the pharmacy, you're gonna keep a lot more of that money in your wallet. And that's not a complicated concept. And I'm curious to see if anybody gloms onto it.
When I went to Grassley to talk about this, I said to Grassley, which speech do you want to see the president or any Republican making for the election? Speech number one is, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the following 16 countries, Greece, Slovakia, et cetera, and we're going to look at the average price of the Part B drugs, and over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to drop that down to about 126%, and that's what we're going to reimburse Part B drugs for in the United States. To which every eye in the White House would be completely blank. What is he talking about? Or how about this one? For you 45 million seniors and disabled people on Medicare, for as long as you've been alive and as long as you've been in the program, you can get sick and get bankrupt. That's over. Never going to happen again. You're never going to pay more than $200 a month. And, I could run for the rest of my life on that one.
I would say, the fact that we still have about 30 million uninsured Americans, I think is something that we all should be pretty collectively embarrassed about. That being said, Medicare for all, Medicare fee-for-service for all, the Bernie Sanders plan is not going to happen in this environment. And, I say that as a realist more than anything else, also being nonpartisan. So I think as we start thinking about what solutions will actually get more Americans access to health coverage, to the therapies that they need, I think we need to start actually looking more realistically at what could a Medicare Advantage buy-in look like? What could this actually look like? How can we continue to expand Medicaid? What's working, what's not working? The states are the labs for the federal government. What are we actually seeing success? Where are we not seeing success? That's where I think, enough of this rhetoric around policies that will actually not be implemented in their current form, and let's start aligning around things that could actually get more Americans insurance.
Also, if you want to go down the path of a Medicare plan, you can buy into an age, fill in the blank. You also have to talk about allowing for-profit insurance companies to sell policies across state lines to maximize the economy of scale, like Uncle Sam. All sorts of stuff is out there.
So I just want to say, look at the center of this chart. That's what I call moderation, right? That's working together to accomplish what needs to get done in a nonpartisan way.
So, Jim, I'll go back to your comment. That would be a great speech for the president to be able to give. Why do House Democrats want to let him give that speech before an election?
So that's the problem. We have the State of the Union where we had the no handshake, and then Pelosi the Ripper. So the war is really heated up. So whether they could actually ever get to a deal is a big question. And frankly, I think the problem for Pelosi is that she knows that even if she were to take that center of the Venn diagram and say, let's do that, that would be a victory for the president, a victory that she does not want to see. So I think the biggest problem, there are two problems that overcome right now. One of them is the Democrats seem at this point to politically, to prefer to have the issue than a result. And the president, wants to have more, accomplished than he could possibly do. So, my advice has been to the Republicans in the Senate, go to the negotiation and say, we will give you an out-of-pocket cost cap for 45 million seniors. And if I know you want the rest of the world, but that's what we're willing to give you. Maybe they negotiate something out on inflation caps, but we're willing to do that. And if you don't take that deal, then we're going into the election and say, you turned your back on 45 million Medicare beneficiaries. That's pretty strong politics.
I think it is, and it's also worth noting, just to be an optimist for a second, that 6 months ago, we had the same concern that there would never be a USMCA, and that, the Democrats eventually did allow the president to have that Rose Garden ceremony, that press conference there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing, and I want to thank the bio staff for putting up this final slide. My signature is on all three of those editorials, and I would encourage